What's up, y'all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about why most nonprofit boards misunderstand financial statements. You're probably like, because often we hear about board literacy, teaching the board how to understand financial statements, and sometimes having board members who need a little bit more hand-holding or explanations when it comes to how they can truly assist once they get these, board financial packages. And so if you want to understand that deeper and how you can assist, then you want to keep watching. So before I get into the specific reasons, I want to generally speak about the fact that typically when organizations are first created, you're usually setting up your board with a mix of people who understand the mission and the cause. And that is usually not the best way, especially in the beginning, because you really want to get people who can be boots on the ground, roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty. The most common example, right, is that typically when you think of the treasurer, it's not someone who just, I love the organization and so I'm going to help out. Now they made you board treasurer. It's usually someone who may be a CPA, have an accounting background, can speak to numbers so that area, is taken care of, and so on and so forth, right? So when you're thinking of the different roles or board members, you want to be putting people in the seats that truly know about that position. They truly know or have some sort of experience or background in that area so that they can provide value to the organization. Well, let's just say, you have the right board and you even have a CPA or an accountant, someone with like financial background as your treasurer. That's one person. And so still those other board members need to understand what's going on in the financial statements. A huge mistake that I see that happens often is that you just run financials and give them to the board. We don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. When we assist our clients with board presentations, it is a completely different report than just their monthly financials, because for one, it's a lot of information, and a lot of times it's more information than they need. Board members are usually pretty visual, so a lot of times visuals go over better than just looking at these spreadsheets with all these numbers and trying to decipher. And then also you have to remember that a lot of times these board members are professionals, they have careers and they're doing things. And so you want to make sure that when they are giving you their time, that you can be very clear, concise, straight to the point, show them what you need to show them, discuss what you need to discuss, and make your ask. That's the other thing, because a lot of times when you're giving financials, your financial presentation, a lot of times it comes with something on the end of that, whether it's you want a connection made, whether there's a red flag or green flag that you want to raise and you want feedback, support, or whatever the case may be. So you need to know what the purpose of said report is so that you can deliver the right information. We're going to dig into now some of the reasons why they, might not understand the nonprofit financial statements and what we can do to assist. The first common misunderstanding is confusing cash flow with profitability. And this is another reason why we don't just give the P&L and give the balance sheet, because if you don't know how to marry the two, I've had people look at the P&L and say, well, it says that, we made $1 million, let's say in January, but our ending bank balance was not $1 million. There's a lot of reasons, right, for that. And not to mention, you're looking at the wrong statement. If you wanted to know what the bank balance was as of January 31st, you should actually be looking at the balance sheet, right? We know that they're not the accountant, right? They're not the ones keeping the books. And so some of this, it just does not come easy. And so we have to be clear in the reports and the communication that we are delivering. A lot of times board members assume that if a nonprofit is making a profit, right, that it's automatically financially healthy. And that is not the case, right? And so because your organizations are relying on, donations or grants or even restricted funds, right? What you see as income may not actually translate to cash flow. And so that speaks to one of the things that the board members are usually concerned about. They want to know how much is in the bank, how much is that restricted, right? Meaning like we can't even consider that when we're thinking about certain expenses because we can't touch that money. You want to think about that, right? The next common misunderstanding is misinterpreting the balance sheet. I'm not going to give you a 101 on what all is in the balance sheet, but a lot of times if they're looking at the balance sheet and they see, let's say, for example, a large total of assets, right? They might assume that the organization has plenty of resources, and not realizing, kind of like in the first example, that some of those assets are restricted and restricted in terms of like specific projects or specific programs. And so instead of delivering just a balance sheet, either you have to deliver the balance sheet in a way that shows what's restricted versus what's not restricted, or you have to deliver it in a way that you maybe include a note section at the bottom where you're explaining away, thinking ahead of time of the questions that they're going to have and considering those in the notes. And the third misunderstanding is often underestimating the complexity of restricted funds versus unrestricted funds. So if you have funds that have specific restrictions, if board members don't understand that distinction, then they might think that all funds can be freely allocated across the organization. Not to mention, if they don't understand the true compliance requirements that come with that, they might not understand why you're making certain hires, why you're spending in certain areas. And so again, that's another reason why just handing over the P&L is not helpful, right? And so maybe instead of handing over just the blanket P&L, you might need to show them that for specific programs, this is actually how we're spending because we received this grant, it was restricted according to certain stipulations, these stipulations, and that's why if you look at program A and B, money is being spent here in this way. You might be wondering why we have $1 million in the bank, but we're saying we need cash, and that's because 750 of that is spoken for these two programs. This is how much we spent so far, and this is what we have left to spend. Thus, we have this amount of money left over. We need more. Now, here is why we have to also talk through why understanding matters. Your board is the governing body of the organization, and if they don't understand what's happening financially, you could potentially get information that is not helpful. Potentially, they could be giving you directions, right, or directives to do certain things that could be harmful to the organization for lack of understanding. And so the financials, of course, have a direct impact on decision making, right? They're an essential tool for making informed decisions. So when they're not understood fully, hence it leads to poor decision making, right? And so financial health and sustainability is that part two of that. Why understanding matters. We need to know at what point do we have to wave the flag to say, hey, we are in a true cash crunch, or hey, we are, experiencing some green flags, some surplus. We need to do something with these funds. We had an organization recently who got an influx of cash, and instead of just having it sit in the bank, they've applied a portion to a high yield savings account. They're considering investing in crypto. They're thinking about going through their bank to make investments like CDs and other things. But you won't know or have those discussions about what you could be doing if you're not talking about the cash flow. You're not talking about, the surpluses or the deficits, or if you're not talking about what's going in versus going out. You have to have these discussions, and you have to have the proper data to back it up so that the board can therefore give you good insight, good answers, good advice on what you need to do or what you could be doing, some options, right? Okay, and the last reason we're going to talk about why understanding matters is for compliance and governance, right? So boards are legally and ethically responsible for ensuring that your organization is compliant with regulations. Not understanding the financial statements can lead to compliance issues, particularly we're thinking in the tax realm, but also with your specific funders, especially if you're receiving funding from state or the federal government. And so you really want to make sure that you have a handle on those things. We don't want any sort of restricted funds to ever be misallocated. I never want you to violate grant terms or violate any IRS regulations. And so someone on the board having an ear to the ground on these things is helpful, but then also being able to pair that information with what's really going on inside the organization financially is going to be super helpful. Now, I'm not going to walk you through how to understand the financial statements because 9 times out of 10, you guys are running the organizations, right? You're the EDs, right? So we're talking about the board and just more so how you can better deliver the information and prepare them. And so let's talk through some practical tips. The first one, which is the most common, right, is financial literacy training, right? So making sure that board members are going through some sort of a training to truly understand not even the organization's financials, but just the makeup of nonprofit financial statements, just so that they truly understand the foundational piece, right? Then, of course, you want to make sure that you're not just sending reports and that's it. This is why board meetings are important. So typically we send the reports ahead of the meeting, but then as part of your presentation, you're walking them through those reports that you sent. You're highlighting what is important. You're highlighting what it is that you need them to know. And then based off of that, you are encouraging questions, right? Because this also helps to clarify things. This makes sure that things are not misconstrued. And so you want to make sure that you're encouraging conversation, questions, discussion about what it is that you are presenting. The next tip is to make sure that you are working closely with your finance team, because one of the things that I see that often is a big issue is if your CFO or your controller is not the one presenting at the board meeting, you yourself may be a little shaky on presenting that information. And so you need to make sure that you're working closely with your finance team to understand yourself, so that when you're being asked questions or when you're presenting, this information isn't foreign to you. It isn't new to you. You are comfortably sharing this information and able to ask questions, because ultimately you're responsible, right? Ultimately you're responsible. And lastly, simplify the reporting. Stop sending these, 6, 7, 8 page reports that have a ton of numbers and spreadsheets and charts and things. You need to simplify the reporting. You need to make sure that you are including what is most important, what you need their eyes on, and what you potentially may need support with, because that helps to keep things to a minimum and not becoming too chaotic. And so we're gonna finish out this video with showing you an example. I'm gonna walk you through it and just tell you why we've selected those certain things. And then if you have any questions, of course, feel free to drop the questions in the comments. Okay, so here is an example of one of our board reports. I put it in a PDF version. However, we do have some Excel templates that we have in the membership, but I wanted to give you an example of one of the reports that we put together, give or take a few things. So we like to include an executive summary because, again, we like to point their attention to certain things, the things that we know that they're interested in. And so that's what you see here, high-level overview of income statement, balance sheet, point out some specific numbers that we know is important to them. Then we come over to the revenue analysis. So we're, for this particular quarter, how much income did we bring in? What was the target? We then compare it to whatever that prior period is. So if we're looking at an annual report, it's being compared to the prior year. If it's a quarterly report, it's being compared to the prior quarter. So we might want to include a revenue versus budget chart. What are the top revenue accounts? Now, this organization is quite small, so some things are just not and it's not going to be as detailed, but this is just to give you an example. And so, so that's what it's like. So you see very specific numbers, some charts to kind of show you. And again, this should support what's in the executive summary. Oh, and I should mention here, for this example, the executive summary and these numbers here do not correlate. This is just an example. Then we go down to profitability, right? We're looking at revenue. We're looking at revenue in relation to expenses. We want to know, right, are we making enough money to cover our expenses? Here we're looking at top 5, but again, this would change depending on the organization, but we're looking at, okay, top 5 revenue accounts, top 5 expense accounts. Because a lot of times they want to know, well, how are we getting our money? What are the different avenues of funding we have? Same thing with expenses. Like, well, what are our highest expense accounts? Like, where's a lot of our money going? For a lot of organizations, payroll is usually that number one as far as the largest expense. Then we come down to the financials. Now, for some organizations, you might include actual financial reports. Again, we usually like to consolidate, very condensed, right, compared to the prior period. Sometimes we'll also even include a comparison to the budget. Again, it depends on the organization and what they like to see. Yeah, so this is a very straightforward one where this organization is small. Usually they just like to see very specific quick hit things. And so that's how we put this one together. And so if you'd like to gain access to and even see some of our other templates, then you can join us over in the Accounting for Good membership, and you'll be able to take a look at those and then download whichever one is beneficial for your organization, and then you can edit it as you go. So I hope looking at that report template was helpful. And what I want to also let you guys know is that template is available in our membership. And so if you are a first time or a new executive director and you are trying to make some sense of the reports that you need to put together, you have questions on how you might be tracking or managing things, or you just want to overall get a handle on your accounting operations, then I invite you to join the Accounting for Good membership. There's a monthly membership. Right now it is priced at $99 a month. And that is where you can commune with not only accounting expert and myself and my team, but also with other executive directors who are in the same position that you are in. You you can ask questions, you can get feedback, you can get support. We have monthly master classes and monthly Q&As, as well as a host of templates to support you in managing your monthly cadences at work, your accounting setup in QuickBooks Online, and just a host of other things. And so if this sounds like something that would be helpful to you, then I invite you to come join us over in the membership. If not, I hope this video was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.